Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and there's something on my mind that I wanted to share with everyone because it's a concern that we all have, and I definitely think that it's something worth talking about, but there's some things surrounding this whole concept that I think a lot of people have wrong, and the actual implications of what we could see here in the future are much more dangerous than what it is that's being discussed. And that, of course, is in regards to this whole wokeness permeating throughout the military. Now, woke as a word is relatively loaded at this point in time, and I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of using it as a end-all be-all for whatever one side of the aisle doesn't agree with or whatever it is, right? But in general, what we're talking about is this acceptance of just about anything and lowering standards in order to meet a political agenda. And that is exactly what's happening within the military. And whether or not you agree with it, you have to at least acknowledge that that's exactly what's happening. And so a lot of people are concerned that this whole woke situation in the military is weakening the military. They're concerned about the idea that the people who are able to participate now aren't necessarily the brightest and the best war fighters, and therefore we're sending subpar fighters to the front lines because we want to meet some sort of ideological agenda. And that is a reasonable concern to have. But I don't think it's the most dangerous part of the equation. And I hope I'm completely wrong about this. I hope I'm wrong. But there are some things you should consider that I think we need to talk about because I don't see it being discussed very often. Now, before I tell you my thoughts on this exactly and why we should definitely be worried about the direction the military is going and regarding all of that, I do need to thank the biggest supporter of the channel, which is Midway USA. And thanks to Midway USA for allowing me to get out here and do what I need to do to prepare for whatever lies ahead, especially regarding some of these dangerous scenarios we're about to discuss. So, look, everybody's worried about national security being at risk because of these woke, agenda-driven ideological principles that are being pushed on the military, and that's understandable. And I understand why everybody thinks that's the biggest problem we're facing regarding that. But there's two things that I think are more dangerous and more concerning than that when it comes to this whole situation. And the first one is something that I think you definitely should be considering. The people who buy into the most extreme version of this ideological concept are continually being fed this idea that people who don't agree with them are specifically out to harm them and specifically out to ruin their way of life. They want to end their life in many ways. And of course, there's a lot of people who are out there talking about these ideas of, transgender and things of that nature, which I would say the majority of Americans aren't necessarily participating in, but it is shown to these people and presented to them in a way that would make them feel that a huge majority of the population is against them and in fact wants to get rid of them. And by having this extremist ideology permeate into the military and the people who are now being recruited based on that concept, you have this propensity for people to believe or easily be persuaded into the idea that people here within the United States are the biggest threat or are the biggest problem. In fact, may even be the enemy. And this is something I don't think that a lot of people are discussing, but I do think it's problematic. I think that what we're seeing isn't necessarily a way to weaken the military from within in order to allow adversaries in the future to easily overtake us. I think what we're seeing is the ability to use the military against people who are here domestically in the future because those who are within it no longer hold the same principles as those who used to be in it and no longer find the American people to be their ally and rather look at them as an enemy. And that's very concerning to me because that's not how it's supposed to work. And of course, I don't look at the military as being an enemy, and I don't look at people who are on the extreme sides of the agenda to be the enemy per se, because we're all Americans and we have to understand we're being played by the mainstream media and every other investing force out there that is willing to throw money at the idea of chaos and stirring up political discourse. So that's my biggest concern, is that this whole recruiting based on these political agendas aren't necessarily in order to weaken the military, but in order to allow the concept of military force being used against the American people in the future to eventually become a popular notion within the ranks, based on the people who feel that their way of life and their thought process and their own being is threatened by the average American citizen. And that is definitely a concern for me and something that I think we should all be very keen to when it comes to future threats. Now, the other thing that I think it also does, which is a little less dangerous in the sense of being used against us as American civilians, but also still bad for our ability to have high levels of readiness when it comes to national security, is the idea that you are dissuading those who actually would be the most effective warfighters from actually signing up, because they either feel like they don't fit the bill anymore, or maybe they just don't agree with certain agendas or ideologies that are being pushed out there, and they no longer feel that their skills or talent or capabilities are worth handing over to an organization that doesn't necessarily find them to be valuable. And that's a big issue. You know, if you have Johnny Hero, captain of the football team, who's got all the physical prowess and all the mental capacity in order to be the best of the best of the best, being sidelined because of things that are going on within the recruiting process that don't make him feel comfortable with joining up with the ranks that are currently there or presented to be there in the future, then you lose out on Johnny Hero from joining the military. And that can be applied to anyone who has any type of valuable skill or asset that the military could easily use. Those people might decide that this is no longer for them because of things that they see within the recruiting, within the marketing, and within the culture that no longer vibes with them as a person. So, of course, that's an issue. But I think the biggest issue and the biggest concern, especially here in the preparedness community, has always been the idea of martial law and the idea that the military might eventually be used against us through tyrannical means. And a tyrannical government knows it has to take its time in order to implement its will, because it's the easiest way to break down the resistance, is by making things take a very long time, right? So during this process, what they're doing is filtering out those who would be more likely to side with the American people, and filtering in those who already consider a large portion of the population to be a threat to them personally. And then by doing so, it allows the tyrants involved with some of these decisions to make it easier for those people to implement their will against the people when they think the people are actually their enemy. And that's something I just wanted to share because it's been on my mind for quite a while, and it's something that I've considered, and I don't see it being discussed or considered very often throughout the preparedness community. And we all ask, well, how would the military actually implement martial law, or why would they turn against the people? And that wouldn't happen. And most veterans are, pro-Constitution, pro-Second Amendment, good people, and I completely agree with that as of right now. But what will it look like in the future with these efforts that are currently being put into place? And how will they accomplish their goals using the current force that they have? Well, they wouldn't be able to. So strategically and methodically, they would figure out a way to be able to at some point in time by changing the process. And that's what I think we're witnessing right now. So let me know in the comments below what you think about that. This is just a discussion I wanted to have because I think it's something worth considering. I think that it is flying under the radar in many ways, and I think that we have bigger problems on our hands than maybe a lot of us like to admit. So, anything else you need from me, you know where to go, magicprepper.com. If you want to support the channel in another way, there's Subscribe Star, which is $5 a month, and I'll put a link down below in the description as well as in the pinned comment for that. And that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.